The first sound I heard when I opened the condo door was my wife moaning my name, and for one stupid, hopeful second, I thought she had somehow known I was coming home early. Then a man laughed from our bedroom and said, "That's not the name you were screaming 5 minutes ago." I stood in the entryway with a paper bag from Sarah's favorite bakery tucked under my arm, a small lemon cake inside, because exactly 6 years earlier, on our third date, she had told me lemon cake was the fastest way to get her to forgive almost anything. I had left my office near Government Center early after a burst pipe shut down half our floor. I was 30 years old, a procurement analyst for a regional insurance company, and until that Tuesday afternoon, the most dramatic thing I expected to deal with was an argument over delayed vendor invoices. Instead, I heard the wooden slats of our bed knocking against the wall, the same bed I had assembled after Sarah and I moved into that condo in South Boston. My fingers tightened around the bakery bag until the cardboard folded inward and frosting began leaking through the bottom. I didn't call out. I didn't even breathe properly. I moved down the hallway one step at a time, listening to the sounds grow clearer, and every small detail seemed unnaturally sharp. The blue scarf Sarah had dropped over the back of a chair, 2 wineglasses on the kitchen island, a man's charcoal gray jacket hanging beside my raincoat, and a pair of expensive leather shoes positioned neatly outside our bedroom as though their owner had been invited to stay. The bedroom door was partly open. Through the gap, I saw Sarah's bare shoulder, her chestnut hair spread across my pillow, and a man leaning over her whose face I recognized immediately. His name was Julian Mercer. He was 37, polished, always overdressed, and supposedly a private wealth consultant helping Sarah prepare to launch her own boutique public relations agency. I had shaken his hand twice. I had paid for his dinner once. Sarah had described him as basically harmless, which, looking back, should have sounded less like reassurance and more like rehearsal. My stomach contracted so hard that I thought I might be sick on the hallway rug. Heat climbed into my face, but my hands felt refrigerated. My heart wasn't simply beating fast. It was slamming unevenly, as if my body couldn't decide whether to attack, run, or collapse. I quietly took out my phone, switched on the camera, and recorded 11 seconds through the doorway. I captured both faces clearly. I captured Julian saying, "Your husband really has no idea?" And I captured Sarah laughing before answering, "Ethan notices spreadsheets. He doesn't notice me. My name is Ethan Cole." That sentence was the moment my marriage ended. Not the sex. Not the lie. That sentence. Now, I want you to imagine standing 10 feet from someone you trusted with every private insecurity you had, then hearing her reduce your loyalty to stupidity because you weren't supposed to be in the room. Anger arrived, but it came behind something colder. I suddenly understood that if I walked through that door screaming, I would give Sarah control of the next 10 minutes, and those 10 minutes could determine what happened to my home, my savings, and the truth itself. I backed away. I photographed Julian's shoes and jacket, the glasses, and the license plate of the black Range Rover parked outside. Then I walked 3 blocks through a light Boston drizzle before realizing I was still carrying the crushed cake. I dropped it into a trash bin near Broadway Station and sat on a wet bench while trains moved beneath my feet. For 12 minutes, I stared at the video. Then I uploaded it to 2 encrypted storage accounts, emailed it to myself, and called the first family law firm that appeared when I searched for attorneys experienced with concealed marital assets. That last part mattered because Sarah's affair had not appeared from nowhere. For nearly 4 months, little fractures had been showing. She had started leaving Saturday mornings dressed for client strategy sessions in fitted skirts and perfume she once reserved for weddings. She purchased silk lingerie and claimed it was for a brand photo shoot, though she never showed me the campaign. At dinner, she barely heard anything I said, but Julian's name could pull her attention across a crowded room. One night, while I explained that my company might promote me to senior procurement manager, she interrupted to tell me Julian believed women underestimated how much power they could gain by making men feel chosen. I remembered laughing and saying, "Sounds like something a wealth consultant tells clients right before charging them 2%. Sarah didn't laugh. She looked irritated, almost protective of him. There were financial clues, too. We maintained personal accounts and one joint account for the mortgage, utilities, and savings. Over 8 weeks, Sarah transferred $18,400 from her personal account into a newly created business entity called Sable North Communications. That alone wasn't betrayal. She had discussed starting an agency for years. What bothered me was a $9,750 withdrawal from our joint emergency fund labeled office deposit. When I asked which office she had chosen, she snapped that I always smothered her excitement with administrative questions. I apologized. That was the pattern. She created the fog, and I apologized for failing to see through it. By 5 that afternoon, I was sitting inside the Beacon Hill office of attorney Rebecca Sloan, a 52-year-old woman with silver-framed glasses and the calmest voice I had ever heard. She watched the video once without changing expression, then asked, "Do you want revenge, or do you want control over the outcome?" I said, "Both." She closed my phone case and replied, "Then we begin with control." Rebecca explained that Massachusetts was a no-fault divorce state, so adultery would not automatically hand me everything, no matter how satisfying that idea sounded. But dissipation of marital assets, fraud, hidden accounts, or business funds taken from jointly owned property could absolutely matter. She told me not to drain accounts, not to threaten Sarah, not to publish the video, and not to give her any reason to claim I was unstable. We ordered copies of statements, froze my personal credit, documented the balance of every account, and arranged for a forensic accountant to examine the new company. Rebecca also recommended a licensed private investigator named Calvin Rhodes, a former insurance fraud examiner who operated out of a narrow office in Cambridge above a store selling antique maps. "Do not confront either of them again until we know what they're building," Rebecca told me. "Again?" I asked. "You caught them," she said. "Whether they saw you is irrelevant. Emotionally, the confrontation already happened. Legally, we're still preparing." I returned home at 7 carrying Thai food and wearing the same expression I wore after an ordinary bad day. Sarah was showered, dressed in gray sweatpants, and sitting cross-legged on the sofa with her laptop. The wine glasses were gone. Julian's clothes had disappeared. The bedroom window was open despite the rain, and the sheets were spinning in the washing machine. "You're late," she said. I looked at her and felt something inside me reach for the woman I thought I knew, only to close around empty air. "Pipe burst at work," I answered. "We got sent home, but I met with a vendor afterward." The lie came smoothly because the truth had made smoothness necessary. Sarah smiled, stood, and kissed my cheek. I smelled my own shampoo in her damp hair. "You should have texted me," she said. "I could have made dinner. I wanted to surprise you." Her eyes flickered toward the hallway. It lasted less than a second. Then she opened the takeout bag and asked if I remembered extra peanut sauce. I had. Of course I had. During dinner, she talked about Sable North, about potential clients, about how Julian might introduce her to founders and investors. I nodded, asked supportive questions, and watched relief soften her shoulders. She believed she had gotten away with it. The following morning, Calvin installed no devices and broke no laws. He didn't need to. He ran public record searches, corporate filings, property databases, and court histories. I supplied dates Sarah claimed to be meeting clients. Over the next 10 days, he followed her only in public places. She met Julian 4 times. Twice at the Liberty Hotel, once at a cocktail bar in Back Bay, and once inside a co-working building where Sable North rented a tiny glass-walled office. Meanwhile, Rebecca's forensic accountant found something more important. The $9,750 office deposit had not gone to a landlord. It had passed through Sable North and then into a private investment vehicle controlled by Julian. 2 weeks earlier, another $24,000 had been transferred from a home equity line Sarah opened electronically using information from our mortgage documents. My signature appeared on the authorization. I had never signed it. Let me pause here, because infidelity can make you focus on the bedroom while the real damage is happening at a bank. If I had confronted Sarah that first afternoon and stormed out, she could have moved more money, destroyed messages, or claimed every transfer had been consensual. Instead, I kept waking beside her, going to work, and watching the numbers tell me exactly how deep the betrayal ran. On the 11th night, Sarah initiated sex for the first time in almost 3 months. I turned her down gently, saying I was exhausted. She rolled away, waited in silence, then asked, "Ethan, are you happy?" There it was, the opening she had been preparing. Why wouldn't I be? I asked. She sat up against the headboard, pulling the sheet around herself like she was about to deliver a thoughtful presentation. She said our marriage was loving but overstructured. She said human beings weren't naturally built for ownership. She said she had been reading about ethical non-monogamy and wondered whether opening the marriage might let us rediscover each other without resentment. I stared at the woman who had already brought another man into our bed and listened as she presented permission as though it could travel backward through time. "Is there someone specific?" I asked. She answered too quickly. "No, this isn't about anyone." "Julian?" Her face tightened, then relaxed. "He's a business advisor, Ethan. This is exactly why I was nervous to talk to you. You turned everything into an investigation." I nearly laughed at the accuracy of that accusation. Instead, I lowered my voice and asked, "What would open mean?" She moved closer. Her fingertips traced my forearm, slow and careful. She spoke about rules, honesty, separate experiences, no coworkers, no bringing anyone home. Every rule described the opposite of what she had already done. Then she kissed my shoulder and whispered, "Maybe freedom would make us want each other again." That was when my plan changed. Until then, I had been collecting evidence while pretending nothing was wrong. But Sarah had just offered me a mask I could wear openly. I told her I needed time, then spent 3 days becoming slightly warmer. I brought her coffee in the morning. I sent one affectionate message during lunch. I complimented the navy dress she wore to meet Julian. Not enough to look artificial, just enough to make her believe her proposal had awakened something in me. Slow seduction sounds romantic when people describe it in novels. In reality, it can be a weapon. Sarah had used attention to convince Julian she was sophisticated, hungry, and available. I used familiarity to convince Sarah that I was still the safe husband whose love could be activated whenever she needed it. I remembered every detail that had once made her soften. The jazz playlist from our first apartment, takeout from the tiny Italian place in the North End where we celebrated our engagement, my thumb brushing the inside of her wrist while she talked. I hated myself a little each time it worked. But it worked. Sarah became more affectionate and less cautious. She stopped closing her laptop when I entered. She left business documents on the dining table. She began talking about our future again because she thought she had neutralized the threat before I even knew one existed. On Friday night, I told her I had thought about the open marriage proposal. Her eyes brightened. "And?" "I might be willing," I said, "but I need total financial separation first. If we're changing the boundaries of the marriage, I don't want either of us wondering whether money is influencing our choices." She studied me carefully. "What does that mean?" "A post-nuptial agreement. Separate business debts, separate investment liabilities, written disclosure of outside accounts. If Sable North succeeds, it stays yours. If my career grows, that stays mine. Neither of us gets trapped." Sarah tried to hide how much she liked the sound of Sable North remaining hers. "That feels extreme," she said. "So does opening a marriage." I let silence do the work. Then I touched her face and added, "I'm trying to trust the version of us you say we can become." She kissed me. 2 days later, she agreed to meet independent counsel, exactly as Rebecca insisted she must. We did not hide the terms. We did not rush her signature. Her attorney reviewed every clause, warned her in writing, and made Sarah disclose Sable North's accounts and liabilities. Sarah believed the agreement protected her coming fortune from me. What it actually did was force her to identify Julian's investment vehicle, the forged home equity authorization, and 3 transfers she had previously concealed. She tried omitting the largest one. Rebecca's team already had it. That omission became evidence of intentional non-disclosure. During those same days, Calvin uncovered the twist none of us expected. Julian was not merely sleeping with Sarah while helping her build a company. He was repeating a system. 2 prior civil complaints accused him of persuading women, both married small business owners, to invest personal or marital funds in private ventures that later collapsed. One case had settled confidentially. The other disappeared after the plaintiff withdrew it. Julian had no meaningful investment portfolio, no impressive roster of founders, and no legitimate reason to need Sarah's money. His Range Rover was leased through a company carrying $312,000 in judgments. His luxury apartment belonged to a cousin. His apparent success was stage dressing. And Sarah, who believed she was seducing a wealthy man into financing her freedom, had been selected because she had access to our home equity, strong credit, and a husband she openly described as predictable. The final piece came from Julian himself. Calvin photographed him leaving a restaurant in Seaport with another woman, then kissing her beside his car. She wasn't a client. She was his actual girlfriend of 4 years, a pharmaceutical sales director named Monica, who apparently knew nothing about Sarah. I could have contacted Monica immediately. Rebecca told me to wait. "A fraud investigation is stronger when the target believes every relationship is intact," she said. So I continued the slow performance. I let Sarah believe I was moving toward her open marriage. She let me believe Julian was only her advisor. Julian let Sarah believe he loved her. Every person at that table was playing a role, but only one of us knew the entire script was about to burn. 3 nights before Sarah was scheduled to sign the final transfer of $60,000 from the home equity line into Julian's fund, I cooked dinner, opened a bottle of the same wine we had served at our wedding, and asked her whether she was certain this new version of our marriage was what she wanted. She looked directly at me and said, "I've never been more certain of anything." I nodded, reached across the table, and held her hand. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Calvin containing an audio file and 6 words. "Julian is ready to talk. He knows." The next morning, I told Sarah I had an early vendor meeting and drove across the Charles River to Calvin's office in Cambridge. Julian was sitting beneath a framed 19th century map of Boston when I arrived, wearing a camel-colored coat and no trace of the confidence I remembered from our dinner together. His right knee bounced continuously. A paper cup trembled between his hands. Rebecca sat beside Calvin with a legal pad on her lap, and before I took the empty chair opposite Julian, she said, "For clarity, Mr. Mercer asked for this meeting through his attorney. No promises have been made regarding civil action or referral to law enforcement." Julian looked up at me. "Ethan, I'm sorry." I put my phone on the table, activated the recorder with everyone's knowledge, and asked, "Which part?" He swallowed. "All of it." "That's not an answer." Rebecca gave me a small nod, reminding me to let him speak rather than feed him facts. Julian said he had met Sarah at a brand development seminar 9 months earlier. She approached him after his presentation, complimented his jacket, and asked whether he advised early-stage agencies. At first, he genuinely intended to sell her consulting services. Then she began sending late-night messages, talking about feeling invisible in her marriage and describing me as a cautious man who controlled every dollar. That claim was ridiculous. Sarah had full access to our joint accounts and earned her own salary, but Julian admitted it made our finances sound vulnerable. He invited her for drinks, encouraged her business ambitions, and began telling her that talented women sometimes needed emotional leverage to escape conservative husbands. "You slept with her to get access to our money," I said. Julian stared into his coffee. "I didn't think of it that bluntly." "Think harder." He flinched. "Yes." Sarah had spent weeks slowly drawing him in, or at least believing she was drawing him in. She wore dresses he praised, repeated his opinions back to him, manufactured reasons to touch his arm during meetings, and confided increasingly intimate details about our marriage. She thought seduction gave her control. Julian allowed her to think that because every romantic step brought him closer to our financial records. The first time they slept together was at the Liberty Hotel after he claimed he could secure a $250,000 investment for Sable North. He never had an investor. The money was supposed to come from Sarah, pass through his fund, and return as a fake investment minus fees and fabricated losses. "Did you ever love her?" I asked. His answer came immediately. "No." I must have shown something in my face, because he added, "I know that sounds cruel." Cruel would imply you're worried about her feelings. Julian rubbed both hands over his face. She was useful. She wanted someone to tell her she was exceptional, and she was willing to pay to keep hearing it. I told her what she wanted. That was it. There are answers you think will satisfy you until you actually hear them. I had imagined Julian admitting that Sarah meant nothing to him, and part of me expected a sense of justice. Instead, I felt disgusted by everyone involved. Sarah had betrayed me for a performance. Julian had performed desire to steal from her. And I had spent weeks performing affection to stop them both. The difference, I reminded myself, was that I had not created this game. I was trying to survive it without losing my future. Julian explained why he had suddenly contacted Calvin. His girlfriend Monica had noticed unusual transfers connected to one of his companies and confronted him. She threatened to hire an attorney and report him unless he disclosed everything. Julian panicked. His lawyer advised him that cooperating before the $60,000 transfer occurred might be his only chance to avoid an even more serious fraud case. He brought emails, encrypted messages, account ledgers, and voice recordings. In one recording, Sarah told him she could access another $85,000 if she refinanced the condo after our relationship arrangement was finalized. In another, Julian warned that I might discover the forged authorization. Sarah laughed and said, "Ethan would rather blame himself for being inattentive than believe I could outsmart him." I asked Calvin to play that sentence twice. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted it fixed permanently in my memory. If you have ever been tempted to forgive someone before they have even admitted what they did, listen closely to how they speak when they believe you will never hear them. Private contempt is often more honest than a public apology. Rebecca questioned Julian for nearly 40 minutes. He acknowledged that Sarah understood the money was being concealed from me, but she did not know his investment fund was essentially empty. He acknowledged sending her fabricated statements. He also confirmed that Sarah intended to announce our open marriage to friends only after she had left me, allowing her to claim the affair began with my consent. She had already drafted messages describing us as amicably transitioning. The plan was not only to betray me, it was to edit the timeline until I became an obstacle in her story rather than the person she deceived. Before Julian left, I stopped him at the door and asked one final question. "When you were in my home, did she tell you I might come back?" His eyes moved away from mine. "She said you never left work before 6. And when I did, she texted me afterward. She said she thought she heard the front door, but when nobody came in, she decided it must have been upstairs." That explained the flicker in her eyes when I returned carrying Thai food. Some part of Sarah knew. She had simply chosen the explanation that allowed her to keep lying. Julian apologized again. I told him, "Save it for the affidavit." By noon, Rebecca had enough evidence to file for divorce, request temporary financial restraints, challenge the home equity debt, and pursue civil claims related to the forged signature and dissipated marital funds. She coordinated with a financial crimes attorney and advised me to make a formal report. We did not accuse anyone publicly. We placed documents in front of people whose job was to evaluate them. That distinction mattered to me because Sarah would later tell everyone I had destroyed her life out of jealousy. The truth was simpler. I showed the system what she had done, and the system responded. The timing moved quickly after that. A judge issued temporary orders preventing either of us from transferring, borrowing against, or disposing of significant marital assets. The bank froze the unused portion of the home equity line and opened its own fraud review. Sarah's business account was restricted pending verification of disputed funds. Julian's planned $60,000 transfer died before it could leave the condo's equity. At 3:30 that afternoon, a process server waited outside the co-working building in Back Bay. Calvin had confirmed Sarah would be there with Julian to finalize the investment documents. Julian arrived first as part of his cooperation. Sarah appeared 15 minutes later wearing a cream coat, carrying a leather folder, and smiling like someone walking into the first day of her new life. She entered the lobby. The process server approached her, verified her name, and handed her the divorce petition and financial restraint order. Calvin watched from a coffee shop across the street. I watched through the secure video call on his tablet. Sarah read the first page, looked at Julian, then looked through the glass doors, as if I might be standing outside. "What is this?" she demanded. Julian said nothing. She flipped to the attached schedule of disputed transactions. Her face changed when she recognized the account numbers. Then she struck Julian across the cheek with the leather folder. "You gave him this?" she shouted. People in the co-working lobby turned toward them. Julian stepped back and said, clearly enough for Calvin's microphone to capture, "I'm cooperating." Sarah stared at him. "Cooperating with what?" "The investigation." Those two words dismantled whatever fantasy remained. Sarah grabbed Julian's sleeve and lowered her voice, but her panic made every syllable sharp. "Tell them this was an investment. Tell them Ethan approved it." Julian pulled his arm free. "He didn't. You said the authorization was fine. You forged it, Sarah." "Because you told me to. I told you I needed proof of consent. You said you could handle him." She glanced around the lobby and realized at least a dozen people were listening. "You love me," she whispered. Even through the poor audio, I heard it. Julian's shoulders sagged, not with affection but embarrassment. "No, I don't." Sarah went still. "What?" "I never loved you. You said we were leaving together. I said whatever kept you investing." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Julian continued because his lawyer had apparently instructed him not to soften the truth. There was never a $250,000 investor. There was never a house in Miami. I wasn't going to build Sable North with you. I wanted the money. Sarah slapped him across the face with her bare hand. Building security moved between them immediately. Calvin ended the call when the confrontation became chaotic, but by then I had seen enough. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the strange quiet that comes when a nightmare finally introduces itself by name. Sarah called me 19 times in the next hour. I ignored every call and forwarded the voicemails to Rebecca. The first was furious. "Ethan, whatever you think you saw, you don't understand the context." The second was frightened. "The bank froze everything. I can't even pay the co-working invoice." The fourth blamed Julian. The seventh blamed me. By the 12th, she was crying and saying we could repair our marriage if I came home. In the 18th message, she finally admitted sleeping with him, but insisted it happened only after she had emotionally proposed opening the relationship, as though thinking about requesting permission counted as receiving it. That evening, I packed a small suitcase and moved into a furnished apartment in Charlestown that Rebecca had helped me arrange. I took clothes, work equipment, family photographs, and the chipped ceramic mug my younger sister made for me in high school. I left every expensive object documented and untouched. Sarah returned to the condo around 8. The security camera showed her pacing through each room, opening closets and shouting my name. When she discovered that my side of the bedroom was empty, she sat on the floor. Then she called from a different number. I answered only because Rebecca had advised me that a calm recorded conversation might reveal useful information. "Where are you?" Sarah asked. "Somewhere safe." "Safe from me?" "Ethan, I'm your wife. You stopped behaving like my wife before you asked permission to stop." She inhaled sharply. "Julian manipulated me." "He did? Then you understand." "I understand that he manipulated a woman who was already willing to cheat on me, forge my signature, borrow against our home, and rewrite the story afterward. I was going to put the money back." "With what money?" She didn't answer. "He promised the company would be worth millions." "And you believed him because he slept with you?" "It wasn't like that." I watched it, Sarah. Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. She whispered, "You were there." "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked through the apartment window toward the illuminated Bunker Hill Monument and gave her the only honest answer I had. "Because you had already taken my trust. I wasn't going to let you take my judgment too." Her crying changed then. It became louder, almost theatrical, as if volume could pull me back into the familiar role of comforting her. She said I had seduced her into signing financial disclosures. She called the post-nuptial negotiations entrapment. I reminded her that she had independent legal counsel, had been given full time to review everything, and had chosen to conceal an account even during mandatory disclosure. "You made me think you wanted me again," she said. "I did want you," I answered. "I wanted the woman I thought I married. She wasn't real." That was the only moment my voice nearly broke. Sarah heard it, and immediately softened hers. "She can be real again. Come home tonight. We'll shut everything else out, just you and me." "I'll tell the police Julian forced me. I'll close Sable North. I'll do whatever you want." I could hear her shifting strategies as she spoke: victim, lover, frightened wife, cooperative witness. Slow seduction had always been her favorite tool because she believed desire erased evidence. This time it failed. "Communicate through Rebecca," I said, and ended the call. The next several weeks were a blur of sworn statements, bank interviews, forensic reports, and temporary hearings. The court did not award me everything simply because Sarah cheated. Real courts rarely deliver the kind of theatrical punishment people imagine. What mattered were documents. The forensic accountant traced $34,600 in marital money into Sable North and Julian's entities. Another $7,200 had paid for hotel rooms, restaurants, clothing, and a weekend in Newport that Sarah told me was a client retreat. The forged home equity authorization triggered a separate dispute with the lender. Julian's cooperation strengthened the case, but his own problems were just beginning. Monica ended their relationship, provided additional records, and joined one of his former clients in pursuing claims against him. His professional registration came under review. Sarah initially denied knowing the authorization was fraudulent. Then Rebecca produced a message Sarah had sent Julian. "Ethan's signature is easy. He signs vendor contracts all day and never studies his own handwriting." That sentence destroyed her credibility in a single hearing. The judge looked over his glasses and asked Sarah's attorney whether she wished to amend her client's statement. Her attorney requested a recess. I watched Sarah leave the courtroom with her face drained of color. I had never enjoyed humiliating her, but I also no longer confused consequences with cruelty. Sit with that distinction for a moment. When someone says your decision to reveal their conduct ruined them, ask who created the conduct in the first place. Silence might have protected Sarah's image, but it would have required me to finance the protection with my home, my name, and my future. The legal strike was fast, but the public collapse began almost by accident. Sable North's largest prospective client was a Boston nonprofit planning a high-profile fundraising gala. Sarah had presented herself as an expert in ethical reputation management. When the nonprofit's board learned that her accounts were frozen during a fraud dispute and that she had submitted false financial disclosures, it terminated negotiations. Sarah blamed me for contacting them. I had not. The co-working company had required an updated payment method, then performed a routine review after her business account was restricted. One board member knew the building manager. Boston is a major city that often behaves like a small town wearing an expensive coat. Information moved. Sarah resigned from her communications job after her employer opened an internal review into whether she had solicited company clients for Sable North. 2 co-workers submitted emails showing she had. A former friend posted a vague message about watching a married branding expert get exposed by her own brand, and people who knew Sarah filled in the details. I asked everyone close to me not to post the bedroom video or discuss intimate evidence. I wanted a divorce, not a circus built from revenge pornography. But court filings concerning money were partially public, and Sarah had built her career around networking. The same network that once amplified her charm now circulated the facts faster than any announcement I could have made. Her parents called me from Worcester. Her father, Paul, apologized so many times that I finally stopped him. "You didn't forge my signature," I said. Sarah's mother asked whether I might reconsider the divorce if Sarah entered therapy. I told her therapy could help Sarah become a better person, but it could not make me volunteer to be her husband again. To their credit, they did not pressure me after that. Paul later gave Rebecca a box containing documents Sarah had stored in their basement. Among them was a printed business proposal identifying our condo equity as founder-controlled capital. My name appeared nowhere. The financial case tightened further. Then, 6 weeks after the lobby confrontation, Sarah requested a private settlement meeting. She arrived without the confidence I associated with her. Her hair was pulled into a plain knot. She wore no wedding ring and no makeup. For a second, I saw the 23-year-old woman I had met at a trivia night in Somerville, the one who laughed so hard at my terrible answer about state capitals that beer came out of her nose. Grief moved through me unexpectedly. Not doubt. Grief. She sat across from me and said, "Julian told me what he did to the other women. I know. I wasn't special to him. No. Did you know that before he told me in the lobby? Yes. Her eyes filled. And you let him say it there. Rebecca shifted beside me, but I answered before she could intervene. I didn't arrange his words. I arranged for you to receive legal papers. Julian decided to tell the truth because he was cornered. You could have warned me. You were about to send him another $60,000 stolen against our home. Sarah stared at the table. I thought I was building something. You were. Just not a company. She looked up. What was I building? A version of your life where every person existed to fund your decisions and applaud your courage. That landed harder than shouting ever could. She wiped her eyes and asked what I wanted. Rebecca slid the proposed settlement across the table. Sarah would accept responsibility for the disputed business expenditures, waive any claim against my retirement growth after our agreed separation date, surrender her claim to the condo in exchange for a carefully calculated share of the legitimate equity, and cooperate fully with the lender's investigation. We would sell the condo because neither of us could afford to keep living inside what had happened there. I would not pursue additional civil damages against her if she complied with repayment terms and provided truthful testimony concerning Julian's fund. Criminal decisions were not mine to control. Sarah read the proposal twice. This leaves me with almost nothing, she said. It leaves you with your documented share after the money you removed is accounted for, Rebecca replied. Sarah looked at me. Is this what you wanted when you started touching me again? You wanted me calm enough to sign my own destruction? I held her gaze. I wanted the truth documented before you could move the rest of the money. Every affectionate thing I did during those weeks felt like cutting off another piece of myself. Don't romanticize it. I wasn't enjoying a game. I was stopping you from robbing me. Sarah whispered, so none of it was real. The pain was. She signed nothing that day. But 48 hours later, after her attorney reviewed the strength of the evidence and the likely cost of prolonged litigation, she accepted most of the terms. The final settlement still required court approval, and Julian's testimony had not yet reached its most damaging point. Because during his sworn deposition, Rebecca asked him who first suggested using an open marriage to rewrite the timeline of the affair. Julian leaned toward the microphone, looked directly at Sarah, and answered, She did? Sarah's attorney objected, but the question had already been answered, and Julian's evidence made denial almost impossible. He produced a message Sarah had sent 5 days before asking me for an open marriage. Once Ethan agrees, everything before that becomes a gray area. People believe the woman who says she was trapped in a cold marriage. Another message followed 20 minutes later. I can make him feel wanted again. He always folds when I'm affectionate. I watched Sarah read her own words on the conference room monitor. She didn't look at me afterward. That was the last day she tried to describe her proposal as an honest attempt to save our relationship. The divorce was finalized 4 months later in a Suffolk County courtroom on a bitter February morning. The judge approved a settlement under which the condo would be sold, legitimate equity divided according to the agreement, and $41,800 in unauthorized business and affair-related spending charged against Sarah's portion. She assumed responsibility for the remaining Sable North debts and waived any claim to the promotion bonus and retirement contributions I received after our separation date. I retained my personal savings, my vehicle, and the investments I had entered the marriage with. The forged home equity authorization was removed from my responsibility after the lender completed its investigation, though the legal process surrounding Sarah's conduct continued independently of our divorce. It wasn't the fantasy outcome where the betrayed husband walks away with every dollar and the unfaithful wife is dragged out of court in handcuffs. It was better than fantasy because it was documented, enforceable, and real. I walked out financially intact. Sarah walked out carrying the cost of the decisions she had insisted were hers alone to make. On the courthouse steps, she caught up with me before Rebecca and I reached the sidewalk. Snow had begun settling in Sarah's hair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Traffic moved along New Chardon Street, and somewhere nearby, a delivery truck kept reversing with the same mechanical beep repeating over and over. Sarah finally said, "Congratulations. You won." I shook my head. "This wasn't a contest." "It felt like one." "That's because you thought marriage had winners before I knew we were competing." Her face tightened. "Do you hate me?" Months earlier, I would have had a complicated answer. That morning, I didn't. "No," I said. "But I believe you now." She understood exactly what I meant. Hatred still involves a kind of attachment. Believing her meant I no longer needed to argue with the evidence of who she had chosen to become. I wished her well in the formal, distant way you might wish well to a stranger boarding a dangerous train, then turned away. Rebecca and I walked to a cafe near Bowden Street, where I bought her coffee and the largest lemon pastry in the display case. She noticed me staring at it and asked whether there was a story behind my choice. "There used to be," I said. Then I ate it anyway. That small moment mattered more than I expected. For months, lemon cake had belonged to the afternoon I discovered Sarah with Julian. I decided I wasn't letting her keep ownership of harmless things too. Julian eventually entered a negotiated resolution connected to fraudulent representations and financial misconduct. I won't pretend I understood every detail of his case, and some records remained restricted, but I knew he was ordered to pay restitution, lost the professional credentials that made his scheme convincing, and became the subject of civil judgments from more than one victim. Monica never contacted me directly. Through Calvin, she sent one brief message. "Thank you for not blaming women you never met." I appreciated that. She and I had been harmed by the same man, but neither of us needed to turn the other into a character in our recovery. Sarah cooperated against Julian, hoping to reduce her own exposure. Her cooperation helped, but it also placed her admissions into records that followed her far beyond the divorce. At first, she insisted the damage to her reputation was temporary. She moved from Boston to Providence and applied for communications positions under her maiden name. 2 firms advanced her to final interviews. Both withdrew their interest after routine background checks revealed the civil litigation and inconsistencies in her account of why Sable North had collapsed. She blamed me, although I never contacted either company. She joined a women in business networking group and tried presenting herself as the victim of a controlling former husband. One member had previously worked with a nonprofit whose gallant contract Sarah lost. The dates were compared, the court documents were found, and Sarah quietly disappeared from the group's membership page. She tried freelance reputation consulting. A prospective client recognized Julian's name in an old article connected to her business and asked questions she couldn't answer honestly without admitting that her own reputation required more repair than the client's. The irony was brutal, but I didn't celebrate it. I had learned that consequences can be deserved without becoming entertainment. About 8 months after the divorce, Sarah called from a new number. I almost ignored it, but something told me this would be the last attempt. She said she had moved again, this time to Hartford, and was working temporary administrative jobs. "Everywhere I go, somebody finds out," she told me. "A coworker searches my name, or someone knows someone in Boston, or they ask why I left my old company. It never ends." What are you asking me to do? Could you write a statement saying the financial issues were a misunderstanding between spouses? That would be false. You don't have to forgive me. Just help me start over. I stood beside the window of my new apartment in Charlestown, looking across the harbor as evening light caught the glass towers downtown. Starting over doesn't mean finding a place where nobody knows. I said, it means becoming someone who can tell the truth when they do. She began crying softly. You have no idea what this has cost me. I know exactly what it cost. I read every statement. There was a pause, and despite everything, I felt no pleasure in her situation. I also felt no obligation to rescue her from it. I hope you build a life you don't need to lie about, I told her. But I won't rewrite mine to make that easier. I ended the call, blocked the number, and never heard her voice again. Let me stop here, because this is where revenge stories often lie to you. They tell you the best moment is watching the person who betrayed you lose everything. It isn't. The best moment is realizing you no longer need updates about their losses to feel secure in your own life. For a while, I checked Sarah's public profiles more often than I want to admit. I wanted proof that the consequences were still happening. Then one evening, I closed the browser and asked myself why I was allowing her collapse to remain the center of my recovery. Winning the legal fight had protected my future, but it had not automatically healed the part of me that still listened for betrayal whenever someone's tone changed. So I started therapy. I expected to spend every session discussing Sarah. Instead, we talked about why I had apologized whenever she punished me for asking reasonable questions, why I confused being easygoing with having no boundaries, and why I treated my intuition like an accusation that required courtroom-level proof before I was allowed to respect it. I returned to things I had postponed during the marriage. I joined a weekend rowing club on the Charles, even though my first session left my arms useless for 2 days. I took a solo trip to Acadia National Park and stood on Cadillac Mountain before sunrise with a thermos of terrible coffee. At work, I stopped quietly solving problems while other people presented the results. I applied for the senior procurement manager position, showed exactly what I had contributed, and got it. The promotion increased my salary by $22,000 a year and gave me responsibility for a team of 6. 6 months later, I used my share of the condo sale and part of the recovered funds as a down payment on a smaller place in East Boston with wide windows and no hallway I was afraid to walk down. I stayed single. That surprised friends, who expected my happy ending to include meeting someone better. Maybe that will happen eventually, but another relationship was not the prize waiting at the end of my divorce. Peace was. Self-respect was. Waking up in a home where I didn't need to inspect another person's mood before asking a basic question was. The strangest proof of my transformation came almost 2 years after that Tuesday afternoon. I attended an industry conference at a hotel in downtown Boston, and during a break, I saw Sarah crossing the lobby with a box of printed name badges. She worked for the event staffing company. Her hair was shorter, her coat was inexpensive, and the confident way she once entered every room had disappeared. She saw me at the same moment. We stood perhaps 20 feet apart. I expected anger, satisfaction, or at least the old ache. I felt none of them. Sarah gave me a small nod. I returned it. Then someone from my team called my name, and I turned toward the people waiting for me. I didn't look back. That was when I knew the story was finally over. Not when the divorce became final, not when the bank cleared my name, and not when Sarah's latest attempt at reinvention failed. It ended when she appeared in front of me and occupied no more emotional space than any other person passing through a hotel lobby. If anything in my experience is worth carrying into your own life, it would be these 5 lessons. Number 1. When I heard Sarah laughing about my predictability, my first useful decision was not confrontation but preservation. I secured the video, documented the accounts, and spoke to an attorney before anger could create evidence against me. Number 2. Affection does not erase financial facts. Sarah tried to disguise forged debt and hidden transfers as part of a romantic awakening, but every dollar left a trail, and that trail mattered more in court than any dramatic accusation. Number 3. Use professionals when the stakes are bigger than your emotions. Rebecca, Calvin, and the forensic accountant each found something I could not have uncovered safely or legally by myself. Number 4. Do not confuse exposing the truth with publishing every humiliating detail. I protected the evidence without releasing the intimate video, because accountability did not require turning private betrayal into public spectacle. Number 5. Winning and healing are separate jobs. The settlement kept Sarah from taking my financial future, but therapy, boundaries, work, and an ordinary peaceful home gave that future meaning. Now I want to know what you would have done at the moment Sarah proposed an open marriage after already cheating. Comment 1 if you would have stayed calm and built the legal case. Comment 2 if you would have confronted her immediately, or comment 3 if you think Ethan's slow performance crossed a line even though it protected him financially. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm always curious how far these stories travel. If this one stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe for more stories about betrayal, consequences, and rebuilding with your dignity intact. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional patterns, fully rewritten in Boston to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.